Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Podcast Digest. My name's Dan Lizette. Thank you very much for coming back and joining me. I've got a really big show this week. I'm really happy I'm accomplishing something here. And first of all, what I'm doing is I'm returning to what is, and you guys know at this point, I am a huge fan of the technology category. I listen to so many different shows, and probably my all-around favorite network, no offense to all the others that I listen to, is probably Relay FM. I think that probably fills up my subscription list more than any other individual network overall. And one show that I have had two of the guests on, as longtime fans will know, is Material. It is the sort of Android-based podcast for Relay FM. Previously, I've spoken with Russell Ivanovich as well as Andy Anatko. But this week, I get to complete the Material podcast hat trick. Long time in conversation, and I'm pretty sure she's got some things up her sleeve to respond to some of Russell and Andy's previous comments, if you will. But I'm really excited to kind of flesh out this whole story. So my guest this week, please welcome, is a UX designer by day, if you will, and 1/3 of Material, Yasmine Evjen. Yasmine, welcome to the Podcast Digest.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited to tell everyone that Russell and Andy lied. It was all lies. It was all lies, and I'm here to tell the truth. Actually, now I'm trying to think back, because I did listen to those episodes, but I listened to them when they were released. So it was a way back. It's been a while, so I can't remember everything they said. So you'll have to refresh my memory.
That's okay. We'll just deny everything they said as true. So.
Yes, exactly. All of it. Just take my word for it. No, I know that you've been asking me to be a part of this show. You've been wanting to have me on there for quite some time, but our schedules just haven't aligned. But finally, we got it. So I'm excited.
I believe now Material will hold a very probably long-standing place in the Podcast Digest history. The first show to ever have 3 hosts on. So that's exciting to me.
There we go. The trifecta.
I know I've had 2 from other shows. The one, especially in technology, folks, that you guys know that jumps to mind is I've had 2 of the 3 hosts of Accidental Tech podcasts.
Okay.
John Syracuse and Casey Liss. Getting Marco on a
rival
podcast
Casey.
is very difficult. Yes. But before we jump into Material, Yasmine, and go into all those other questions, I want folks who aren't familiar with you, which I hope is very few at this point, having that I've had sent 2 waves of people to Material, this being the 3rd. But for anybody by chance just now joining us, tell folks a little bit about yourself and your life prior to Material.
Yeah, so I am a UX designer by day, as you mentioned before. So I help build mobile apps for people. And so for people that don't know what UX design is, because I only say this because I actually just got back on vacation with my husband's family, and everyone's asking my husband, I can overhear him saying, "So what does your wife do?" And I can just hear him like spew out these words. And I'm like, oh man, no one knows what a UX designer does. So here I am to tell you what a UX designer does. For the most part, I work on how the app flows and helping you as a user try to achieve whatever you're set out to do within the app. So as a designer, I don't necessarily focus so much on the visuals, although they do play a part into the whole experience of the app. My focus is more on the interactions and how you navigate through an app. So that's kind of what I do by day, which is a lot of fun because, I'm a huge Android nerd. So being able to work on mobile apps is kind of my passion. I used to do web design development before that. And I am very much involved in the community. Like later this month in July, or I guess, we don't know when this is going to be released yet. I told them, Dan, I'm sorry. I broke the news to them that we're recording a little off. But I'm actually involved in App Camp for Girls, which is an organization that helps girls going into 8th and 9th grade to build an iOS app. So I'm the design coach there. So I am huge, very much passionate about getting women into technology and getting more diversity into technology, because I think that's what ultimately creates really, really great products. And so that's kind of me and the little bit. And
I saw the work that you're doing with App Camp from Girls. I had pulled up in preparation the conversation from your blog, I guess, that went out to relay insider newsletters on the Better Know a Podcaster, and it was mentioned in there, and it was one note I did want to touch on as well. But What about before all this technology stuff? Did you go to school for UX design, or was this a different, kind of fork in the road to the original plan? Or growing up, sort of, what did you always kind of see yourself doing?
So that's actually funny. I'm trying to think back into my high school years if I had any tech classes. And I remember helping a friend, like doing the voice audio for one of the cartoons she was making in Flash, building in Flash. But I don't remember actually taking like a tech class in high school. I remember taking like a photography class and things of that nature. But I think I've always been kind of into computers, during high school and middle school age, just kind of tinkering with stuff. But in terms of actually like learning how to code and whatnot, that was just something that never really crossed my path. I went to a community college at first. I started, and I actually wanted to be a lot of things. One of them was a history major. Another one was a geology major because I wanted to be a volcanologist because I wanted to go see volcanoes. And there was actually a lot of different majors. If you ask my family back then, it's like, oh man, she's switched majors because I was just so interested in so many different things. But the thing that actually kind of got my attention was my freshman year of college. I had to take a computer class to fulfill my computer recs. And I took a Flash class because I said, hey, that's that thing that's on websites. So this was, back in the day when Flash was still on websites, very popular. And I was like, oh, that sounds kind of like fun, right? I'm going to go take it. And I took a class, and I love the illustrations on it, on drawing, and I did learn, I forget, it was before ActionScript, so whatever Flash was using before ActionScript, that's what I learned to code in for Flash, just like making interactive, I think it was like an interactive map. And I was talking to my professor who was leading the class, and he's like, you're actually pretty good at this. And I was like, oh yeah? And he's like, yeah, you should, explore this as a career. And I asked him, oh yeah, you can get a degree in this, which is pretty funny because, of course, tech right now is like the best, it's just kind of like this is the field to get in. But for me, that wasn't something that was always evident in my life. I didn't really have any people in tech around me. And so that's one of the kind of what stems the passion for getting involved with App Camp for Girls and whatnot, is because a lot of women, in particular with me, being a Latina, aren't aware that there are these, things that you can do in tech, and you can do design, you can do code, and all this stuff, like fun stuff. And so I wish I would have gotten into it sooner, but I'm really glad I was able to get into it in my freshman year. And then I ended up getting my, my bachelor's from Arizona State University in internet and web development. So yeah, so that was kind of how I got into tech.
Awesome. Although I would have to agree with you, the volcanology thing does sound super interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a volcanology podcast.
I'm not really into volcanoes now, but I think it was just interesting. Part of it was also, I think at what point I wanted to go into film. So I was just like, there were just so much stuff. I think I've always just been pretty curious and wanting to explore the world. And so, yeah, I think that's just kind of how it...
I'm just my brain's kind of running through things here, Yasmine. I'm thinking, well, what if you went into volcanology? And then I'm like, is there a volcanology podcast? And then I'm thinking, I wonder what diversity is like with volcanologists. Yes, like, exactly. I'm just kind of like, going all the way through.
It's actually, it's funny because I remember talking to teachers when I was like, well, you have to get your bachelor's in geology first, and then you have to get your like master's, and I don't know what the actual it's for volcanoes thing is, but they're like, but be aware that a lot of people that go into this industry kind of stay there until they die. So kind of like trying to be like, there might not be a lot of jobs, So
you're saying they weren't great on selling this.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess they didn't help nurture that. So, I have asthma, so I'm not sure that would have been a good gig for me, but it was still... Yeah, it was fun. So I guess even, after graduating college, in my junior year, I actually got an internship at an industrial design, product design and development firm. And I did a lot of their marketing and also worked on some products like on the design and also doing, front end devs. So that kind of... That's a little snippet in between that. Somewhere in that time, I got married and had a daughter and, worked from home and stayed at home with my daughter for a bit and did a lot of freelance work at that time, and then kind of went back into the field and wanted to do more mobile apps.
Awesome. And not long after all this, I'm assuming, you had this... what I find really interesting, Yasmine, is that almost every podcaster has this kind of by accident story. But I think yours has one of the most interesting components, because if I'm reading things correctly here, just so everybody understands, Material is a part of Relay FM, big network, big show. Prior to Material, if I wanted to ask you about your podcasting experience prior than that, this would be a short answer, yes?
Yeah. So that's okay. Yeah. Let's tell this story, because I think it's a pretty interesting one. So let's give the rundown of Material, and I just want to the time before Material started and before Google I/O, which was 2015. There was this. I'm just going to say Google I/O 2015, and I shared this a lot on Material, had really just changed my life completely, and being on Material really, changed my life, but just being a part of that community. But yeah, so before Google I/O 15, so before Material Podcast started, I had actually started a podcast with two friends, and it was called Overlap, and I don't think you can find it on the web anymore. And it was called Overlap, and it was supposed to be the overlap of tech, culture, and I think it was design. Now I'm forgetting the three things, and I'm forgetting it because we only released, I think, 2 episodes. So we actually released 1 episode before Google I/O, and it was actually my friends that encouraged me to start a podcast. They were like, Yasmine, you should really start a podcast, because I would always complain that all what I hear when I listen to tech podcasts, everything that's out there is pretty much white males talking about Apple. That's just the way I saw it. And so I was just so frustrated because, being a huge Android fan, I was like, I want more voices about Android. I love tech, but when everything is just pretty much Apple and iOS, it's something that, sure, I love it very much because it's still tech, but it's it's not really speaking to me. And it's usually the same voices speaking into that. And so that's when my friends encouraged me, I think you need to start an Android podcast. And so, it was, me and 2 friends who I've never met before either. They loved Android, and we all happened to be UX designers. And so we kind of started this podcast, and we released 1 episode, and that was the episode that Russell listened to on his way to Google I/O on the airplane ride from Australia to the US.
Well, what's interesting was, as you were telling me about Overlap, which I hadn't heard the name before, maybe I missed it at some point. So I'm sticking it in Google, and I found the Twitter account still there.
Okay,
you have 4 tweets and 11 followers. And what's interesting was I did find an iTunes link to it, although I'm assuming it's just because the name's got to still be available, because when it tried to launch iTunes and bring it up, it says, this is interesting. Unless there's something you're not telling us. It says, the item you've requested is currently not available in the U.S. store, but it is available in the Fijian store.
No, that's not us. I don't know.
Your podcast may be living on in Fiji, Yasmine.
Well, there we go. If you're in Fiji, you can listen to Overlap. If not, you can't. We actually recorded. There was 1 recorded episode that just never hit the airwaves. So, yeah, it was. It was one of those things when Russell asked me to be a part of Material, or he asked me. Okay, so we'll give you the rundown, right? So I go to Google I/O 15, and I get to go through there via Women Tech Makers. And so for me, being at Google I/O was just something it was like a bucket list item that I never knew I would be able to achieve, because I remember watching it the year before. 2014 is when they announced Material Design, and I'm watching it sitting on my couch, and I'm Chromecasting it, via, because they played it live on YouTube onto my TV, and I have my laptop out and my phone out, and talking to friends online as I'm watching this live. And they announced Material Design, and for me, that moment was oh man, Android, Google and Android finally get it. They're finally investing into design. This is one of the things that a lot of people will ding Android on, because the design just wasn't that great before then, right? So a lot of people would be like, oh, Apple and iOS, just the design is so much better, yada yada. And as a designer, it's something that was important to me, but I still very much loved everything that kind of Android stood for. And so when they announced Material Design, I was like, this is awesome. And I kind of said something to myself at that moment when I was like, I want to go there. One of these days, I'm going to go to Google I/O. That's just going to be something like a dream that I want to go to. And I knew that it was something that was actually really hard to get into, because the way that Google I/O, and I know WWDC works, is that you enter into a lottery system. And so you enter into a lottery system, and then you could be selected to go, and then you have to buy your ticket. And so a lot of people, apply, and a lot of people get rejected. And so when I got to go the following year via Women Tech Makers, I was just like, someone pinched me. Is this really happening? But when I was there, I was reaching out to a lot of the developers that I really looked up to in the industry, because I said, like, I'm going to be here. When else am I going to be able to talk to these people? And Russell was one of them because of Pocket Cast. I used Pocket Cast and I love the app. And I actually reached out to him and I said, hey, Russell, like, are you going to be at Google I/O? And he goes, yeah, I will be. And I was like, hey, I'd love to just, say hi to you and, just chat. And he's like, yeah, totally. I want to meet all my Twitter friends. And at that time, I didn't know that he was looking for people to start material with. I just wanted to say hi. And so we got to Google I/O and connected. I sent him a message and he's like, hey, I'm over here by that cafe. And we met up and I met the entire Shifty Jelly team. So it was Chris and... oh gosh, Philip. Okay, man, you're gonna have to edit that out because I actually met Philip again, and and now he's gonna be like, "What you forgot my name for 2 seconds?"
I feel like I might need to leave it in just to kind of foster the fireworks here.
Oh gosh, Philip is gonna be so upset with me, but I don't know why his name just got stuck. But I met them and they were all the most wonderful guys, just the most down-to-earth team, which makes it so much, it just makes it awesome because, sometimes you meet a lot of the developers and you're like, oh man, you like their apps, but maybe you don't care for them that much. But they were just fantastic. And a lot of the other Android developers, that I met, the community is just so welcoming. So I was kind of fangirling over them. Not so much anymore though. Now I'm just like, whatever, Shifty Jelly. No, I'm just kidding.
And it was not long after 2015 Google I/O where Russell was like, hey, I've got a seat here on this show. Are you interested? So what was that conversation like? Did you think it was almost like, are you serious? I mean, were you taken aback or did he kind of hint to that when you met him in person?
No, not at all. He did not hint at that at all. I'm trying to find, because I did save the Hangouts snippet conversation just because it was something that I thought was so funny that and I can't find it now. I did at one time just snapped a pic of it because we met at I/O and we just said hi, and it was kind of this we were saying hi, and then it got a little bit of an awkward silence, and so I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna go now, and I kind of took off. And he was just like, all right,
a bad blind date.
Yeah. Well, when you say it like that, and then when you hear what Russell asked me, it's going to sound even worse. Yeah, so it was. So I get back. I think I see him later on in the conference after they win the Material Design Award, and I'm just like, hey, congratulations, yada yada, and I make a fool of myself in front of some people. But when I got back, he was still in San Francisco time. And we had exchanged Hangouts, messages, because that's how we were talking to meet up. And he's like, hey, so I'm just going to come right out and say it or ask it or something. And I was just like, what? What is? Yeah, exactly. So you said that it was a bad blind date. And now he says that on Hangouts.
Who's this weird Australian guy?
Exactly. And I'm like, I think there was a joke within there. I'm like, look, Russell, I'm a happily married woman. You're a happily married man. This, whatever you're going to say, it's a joke, of course. But I was just kind of like, what is he going to ask? I really have no idea what this man is going to ask me right now, and he's like, I'm starting a podcast on Relay FM with Andy Anako, and, it's going to be material. It's going to be Android show, and it's going to be on Relay FM. And I heard your show, that one episode on Overlap. I heard that show, and I think you'd be perfect. And I'm just sitting here going what? Okay, if someone pinched me, I think I messaged my husband, oh my gosh, he just asked me to be a part of this Android podcast. And my husband's just like, that's awesome. I do not know what an Android podcast is, But, he asked me that, and it was one of those things. And he could tell you I don't think he said this in the podcast because he was being nice, but the whole time I was like, well, all right, yes, tentatively, yes. But I want you guys to talk to me first, via let's meet up first online, on Skype, and see if this is going to be a good thing. Pretty much, I was just saying, I want to give you the option to back out now, to not say, okay, this is it, and then eventually be like, wow, Yasmine is not a podcasting pro or whatever, and we can't stick with her. So yeah, so if you listen to episode 0 of Material Podcast, that was probably my 3rd ever recorded podcast episode.
Wow. And it's funny, and folks who follow me and follow this show know that recently I was at Podcast Movement in Chicago, and it was my first big national conference in the world of podcasting. And it's that similar experience, right, where you're going up to people, or and this is my next question for you. I actually had an occasion for a couple of times people came up to me and said, "Oh, you host that show? I listened to it." Da 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 da. And it's this you kind of have this thought in your mind before you go, like, hey, maybe something good could come out of this trip beyond just the learning, and obviously there's networking, but you kind of always hope, this dream in the back of your head, like, maybe this chance me, and it actually happened for you, which is like it actually is real. So it just kind of justifies like all these dreams people have in the back of their head about meeting somebody that can change things for them.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, this wasn't even something that I even thought about. Like, I think, like I said before, like the idea of me starting a podcast was just wanting to get more diverse voices out there, and an Android show in particular. And so it was just something that I didn't even like anticipate or think it could happen. And so that's what's so wild about it. But I mean, that is one thing definitely for sure. When if you're going to go to a conference, the people that you meet there is just amazing, because you are usually meeting people that are passionate about the same things you are, which, for a lot of people, they don't have that in the community. Yes, you have that online, but a lot of the people that are around you physically may not share the same interests. And so being a part in a community where you can be in person and talking to people like is pretty amazing. And within that, yes, the potential for opportunities for jobs, especially if they're, work-related conferences, can really open up the doors for you. And so I think the amazing part about going to Google I/O 2 years in a row is that I met a lot of women there, but in particular one woman who went there as a student. I think she was graduating college at that time, and then when I saw her the following year, she had like a job. And so I was kind of really fun, because in a way I got to see her get out of school into like a career path. And because I've met her for 2 years, I've kind of been a part of it. Not really, like I didn't really have anything to do with it, but it's just kind of cool to see people, how they change in a year, like the possibilities of things of what can happen in a year.
Yeah, I've said on a lot of occasions, I've been to other conferences as my first big podcasting one, but I definitely, I think the networking and the people are by far the most valuable. Maybe there's a caveat there depending on your line of work, and UX designer for app developers, maybe at I/O or WWDC, that some of those sessions may have great value, but that networking, interpersonal piece has got to be very high on the list as well, as I imagine.
Yeah, definitely.
So just a quick aside, I want to jump ahead in time. We're going to dig into material next, but just I want to jump ahead because you recently, not long ago, at the time this is out, maybe about 4 to 6 weeks ago, came back from Google I/O 2016. So what I'm curious is, how did anybody come up to you this time where they're like, hey, aren't you a host of material on Relay? Did you have that experience on the other side of the coin now?
Yeah, we obviously see the numbers, the download numbers, so we know people listen to the show, but I think sometimes even now you kind of feel like you're just speaking and you're having a conversation with someone, and you kind of forget that this is a conversation that's going to be broadcasted to the world,
Right.
And so, which is why I love podcasting, is like so fun, because it's a conversation between people, right? And so when you don't meet those people in person, it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird to like be like, oh yeah, like people will recognize me, from this. But when you're at a Google, a conference for Android, and you are an Android podcast, it's like people do recognize you. And we had some Material podcast shirts released before, and we did see some of those out. People were wearing them, and I was like, no way, like someone is wearing our shirt. That's so awesome, And we did have some people come up to us and be like, hey, are you Yasmine and Russell? Because for a lot of the times, Russell and I were kind of walking together for some of the stuff. And, sometimes we would just be like walking out to go grab some water. And I think one of my favorite moments when I got stopped was this woman. Russell and I are just walking, and this woman's like, wait, are you Yasmine from Material? And I was like, oh, yeah. I'm Yasmine. Hi, are you a listener of the show? And she goes, yeah. My husband's going to be so pissed. And I was like, oh, And I'm like, okay. And she goes, he's a huge fan of Material Podcasts, and they listen to the show together. And I think that maybe he listened to the show first, and then she kind of got into it just by listening to it. And she goes, I actually am here because of you. And I go, oh, really? Like, what did I do? And she said, you were talking about women tech makers and how you were able to go to Google I/O via Women Tech Makers. So I applied to go be a part of Women Tech Makers, and I was able to get a ticket through them. And wow. I am now here because what you said on that podcast.
That's awesome.
And it was one of those moments that really just gave me chills, because if you know who I am, the more you get to know me, you know that getting more women in particularly, I would love to get more women of color, but even just in general, like more diversity. And there's like something that's just really a big passion of mine. And so for me, sometimes you're talking into a mic and you're talking about tech, and you're kind of like, we're just talking about tech, not necessarily something completely, I mean, it's life changing, but not like, hey, like that we're going to go, I don't know, build a well for someone or something. But, and to see that your words had an impact on someone else, and that gave them an opportunity to do something that they may not have. And like, for me, that's just gives me the chills, because it's like, wow, okay, this podcast, there is purpose beyond, us just having fun every week. So that was something that was like a really, really cool moment. We did have other guests, other listeners come up to us and say hi, and it was really cool. I think there were some funny parts where a lot of people didn't recognize us. And so we were talking for a little bit, and we were hanging out with this guy, and he's a developer at Tumblr. Yes, Tumblr for Trello. No, he was a developer at Trello, and we're just hanging out and talking, and we're kind of in separate groups. And then he just stops and he's like, "Wait, are you Yasmine?" And he's like, and I'm like, "Yeah," And he's like, "You're the voice inside my head." And so it was just funny because people, when they figured out like, oh, that's who we were, it just was like, oh, and I was just like, wow, people actually listen to the show. I think the coolest part is when you have people from Google listen to the show, just because you're like, oh wow, like this is the company we're talking about, and they actually are entertained and listen to it. So yeah, it's definitely a lot of fun. I think I don't know the reach. I'll share another quick story of this is, I just got back from Minneapolis, hanging out with my husband's family, and my cousin, or my husband's cousin, took a Snapchat of me and sent it to one of her friends. And he's like, "Oh, hanging out with Yasmine," like, my cousin, whatever. And her friend goes, "You know Yasmine Evjen?" And my cousin goes, "Yeah, like that's my cousin-in-law. How do you know her?" And like at that time, she asked me, like, "Do you know who this person is?" And I was like, "I have no idea. Does this person like tech?" Because I'm trying to think, like, where would I know this person, And it turns out she listens to Material Podcasts.
That's awesome.
And she was like, yeah, it's just wild.
I just find it absolutely amazing, using I/O as sort of markers in the course of time, that you went from 1 year basically walking the halls in obscurity and fangirling over Russell Ivanovich, to the next year, 1 year later, one conference year later, people coming up and telling you that your participation on the show is the reason they're there. That is such an amazing 12 months.
Yeah, I'd say it was a busy 12 months.
So let's dig into that 12 months, Yasmine. Let's talk about the show itself, and kind of we are over a year at the time people are hearing this. And when I spoke with Russell and Andy, they told us a little bit of those early stories. Now, you mentioned a couple of kind of conversations over Skype just to make sure that everything was going to work out well. Obviously, it did. And I kind of want your take on sort of how were things early versus the progress over time, whether it's for you personally or maybe just your satisfaction with the finished product. Sort of how has it been hanging with these two guys every week for the last year?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said. Like I mentioned, that we did have one conversation on Skype beforehand, but episode 0 was actually the first conversation we had before episode 0 was like maybe 5 minutes, and that was just for all of us to say hi. And Mike Hurley who's the founder of Relay FM, it was on the line, and we just kind of talked for maybe 5 minutes, and that was it. And so episode 0, if you listen to that episode, and which is terrible, you'll actually be able to hear our first ever real conversation that we had together as the three of us. And I think you can tell it's, a lot of people kind of gave us a lot of crap in the beginning for the show. And people are like, it's not as polished, or yada, yada, like it's just not that great. But it's kind of like, when you're friends with someone for the first time meeting them. And the conversations that you're going to have are probably pretty awkward because you don't know each other. You don't know when you pause. You don't know when someone pauses, if that means they're taking a breath and they want to continue, or if that means please interject. There's a lot of things to learn from communication and conversations that you're having with people. Russell has had podcasts before this. Andy, of course, is a superstar in the podcasting world. Podcasting. Exactly, right? And then you have me, who had only recorded 3 episodes before that. So I would say I was a bit nervous because I was like, oh my gosh, what have these guys done? Have they made a mistake by saying yes to me? I think there's definitely that imposter syndrome that creeps in. And so, that being said, there was a lot of, I don't know if growing pains, but I think that maybe that's the word. I don't know. It's just kind of when you're first getting to know each other is just kind of like you're figuring each other out, and then you don't know, each other's ways, and that's kind of hard. At first, if you listen to our episodes, we did a lot of topic-based focus stuff because one of the things that we didn't want to become was a news show. We love all about Android on the Twit network, and we knew that they were a great news show. But what we really wanted material to be was something different, where it was a bit more topic related, and you can have more of a conversations about stuff that's happening within tech versus and in the Android and Google world versus just like, hey, there's a new phone and there's this and there's that, where you don't really get to have a conversation about it. And so we did, a lot of topic stuff. And Andy was actually one that kind of said, hey, if we keep on doing this topic stuff, we're going to run out of topics, And so it was kind of this okay, well then how do we make the shift to cover more current events without it being a news show and also still maintaining the conversational topic piece that I think people have grown to love. And I think that's why we are so successful within the Android and also iOS community, is that people come in to listen to our show because they are interested on what's happening in Google and Android, in tech. But I think they're also just really kind of interested to hear our take on it and just hear the conversations and the things around it and what this means when there's a new thing announced that Android announces, what does this actually mean for me as an individual and the world around me? So it was kind of hard for us to kind of find our way. I think one thing at first is I used to want to be really prepared. So because I was the youngest, co-host on, not the young, yes, I am the youngest on there, but I mean from from a professional.
Youngest in the podcasting. Yeah. In
the podcasting, where I was so fresh into this that I was just kind of I want to be prepared. And there was early on, there was some comments saying they called me the token girl and at least get someone smart. So there was this pressure to be smarter than even be smarter than anything, even be beyond who I was, because I didn't want to be criticized as being dumb, right, on the show. And the guys never got any of that. And so there was this pressure to kind of feel like I had to know a lot more, even though I did know a lot about Android and Google. But I wanted to be prepared because I didn't want to sound like a dumbass. Oops, sorry. I didn't want to sound dumb on the podcast. And so there was just kind of this, and it was never an external pressure. It was more of a definitely internal pressure that I set on myself, just because I didn't want to look like a dummy on the air, or sound like a dummy on the air. So, I think all of it was growing for me as an individual. I'm definitely a lot more confident now. And when people say mean comments, I'm just kind of you know what, that's on them.
Right.
I'm confident in who I am, and confident in what I know. And so I need to, stand in that. And that was something that a lot of people that were my friends and were like, hey, you're going to be doing this podcast. I'm going to have to give you some tips. And I was like, all right, lay them on me. And they said, you're going to have to learn to interject yourself into the conversation a lot more, because as you know, that a lot of my co-hosts tend to talk a lot, and that's not a ding on that. I'm just saying that that's just the truth of it, which is great because, hey, it's a podcast where you need to talk, you can't be quiet. And so they're like, you're going to have to learn to interject yourself or you're not going to get heard. And I was like, okay, so that's something I really had to work on, which I think in the end has made me a better professional just in my career, because I've been able to learn how to voice my opinion a lot better instead of just kind of waiting for that opportune moment,
Yeah, and a couple thoughts just ran through my head there, Yasmine, when you were describing these early experiences. First of all, I never thought that you were out of place. And I remember speaking with and I'm kind of like, at this point, I'm mixing up the conversations. It was either with Andy or Russell that I think you bring and brought and continue to contribute a unique and necessary voice that not only helps the conversation, be it either somebody who does not spend 15 hours a week talking about this stuff, or have this, large back catalog of prior experience that has been aired publicly on a podcast. And then also the woman's voice, which obviously contributes to the overall listening experience. I think that, I think there's a lot of people like you that listen to material, and I think it creates a relatability. Russell is a big-time app developer in Australia, and like we say, Andy is practically an institution at this point. Yeah, so I think you bring a relatability to the show that you don't find a lot on big network tech shows, and I think that in and of itself is extremely important. The other thing I wanted to mention as well was we were talking about kind of how things had evolved over time, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I will be gladly willing to stand corrected if this isn't necessarily the case. It seems like almost roles have sort of evolved and kind of, now sort of settled in, and you are basically almost the host role at this point now. Is that a fair summation, or are you just basically the one that kind of kicks it off? Or it kind of seems like you're kind of driving the ship a lot of weeks. Yeah,
so actually that's a really interesting note. And I can't remember the guy's name who sent us an email, but early on in the show, so I forget what episode it was, but it was just really on in the show. We got an email from one of the listeners, and this listener is actually something that really shifted the show, the direction of the show. And so we have him to thank. He sent us an email and he's like, hey, loving material. If, I could give you like pointers. I don't remember exactly how he worded it, but he was like, I would love it if Yasmine took more of the host position and kind of brought out different elements within Andy and Russell. And so it was actually a listener that actually wrote in saying Yasmine should, introduce the show and be kind of the host of the show. That I think that would be a really good mix. And so we tried it. We were like, okay, let's see what happens, And I think that really shifted the direction of the show, of where I am much more of the host, of the one that kind of tries to keep the conversation going when it's like, all right, let's move on to the next subject. I think we all definitely play a crucial part in the show. Andy, before the show, makes an outline that we are like of some of the topics that we are going to discuss. So he definitely has a voice, within that. And then Russell and I will kind of overlook that, or not overlook, but we'll look over that and say, not overlook that. Sometimes maybe in his mind.
I hope Andy listens to this one. He listened to Russell's conversation.
He did. Now I'm worried.
So, there you go.
He looked.
Andy, she overlooks what you put in there.
We're like, what Andy wrote, we'll just overlook that. No, I'm just kidding. No. We look over that and we're like, oh yeah, definitely. Like, let's touch this, and we'll add stories to it. So it's no. So we all contribute different parts, and I'll kind of look at that and say, all right, let's move on to the next topic, or let's kind of continue, or, this topic's kind of big and there's not enough time. So trying to keep us all in a roll. And then, Russell edits, although surprise, he's actually going to allow someone else to edit the show now. So you heard it here first, maybe, maybe. So that's kind of, and he does, other stuff. He does a lot of our listener emails that he, writes back and tweets, and, I take part in that too. But yeah, it's something that we never, I don't know. Never in our minds did we think material was going to get to where it is now. And when we say that, is that we just wanted to create an Android podcast on Relay FM, which is a very Apple-centric network. And we wanted to give nerds and technologists everywhere a voice for Android. And the fact that we were able to get people like Matthias Duarte, who leads material design at Google, and people from the Nearby team, and just all these other, amazing Googlers and technologists like on our show is just something is just like beyond us. I think we never anticipated that this could be a thing that happens, on our show. And so we're just kind of really happy for what it is. And it's, it's only been a year that we've been on the show. And I think there's going to be some other cool stuff. I hope if you're on Google, if you work at Google and you're working on cool projects, come reach out to us. We love to have people come on the show.
You know what's super interesting, going back to what you were talking about, kind of the evolution with the listener suggestion on sort of you playing more a host role. What's interesting is that sort of takes out, another concern or an easy thing to slip into, as you mentioned earlier, with either Russell, but especially Andy, with his contributions, having to necessarily jump in or interrupt, because obviously if you're introducing a topic, more often than not, you're able to kind of put your perspective and your 2 cents and your take on something out there first, and then, the guys can kind of play off of that, and then obviously you can come back from there. And so, but it makes sure that your voice is heard consistently and regularly, and I think that's a great format. In fact, I know it wasn't always this way. I've been a listener more or less since the beginning, but now it's been this way for quite a while, and I can't even see any other way of this setting up even working. You know what I mean? Like this just seems to make the most sense.
Yeah, we're really happy the listener saw that within us and was just like suggested it, and we're happy we did it, because I think it definitely, I think, has shaped the show into what it is. So I think that's pretty cool. And I've definitely got more comfortable. I got more comfortable with Russell and Andy. We've been talking every week for a year now. It's how can you? It's kind of weird to talk for an hour each week for a year and not be somewhat, be friends. So I think it's like you get to know each other. I talk to most
of my friends a lot less than that.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And so it's kind of like we've become friends and stuff. And so I've never met Russell's family, but I know his family, and in a sense, like I know who they are. He knows about my family, and actually, when at Google I/O at San Francisco, he met my husband because my husband came in for the weekend, and so it's definitely there's definitely a friendship that has come out of that just with both of them, and so. It's kind of it's a weird thing. Podcasting is weird. You talk to a lot of podcasters, so you know this, but it's like the weirdest thing. Every week you have a conversation either by yourself or with others about any random topic that you are interested in, and you just throw it out to the world, and people tune in and listen, just want to hear what you have to say, and it's just like I don't understand. I mean, I get it. But then at the same time, it's just kind of a weird thing.
Well, I'll tell you what. This is my overall summary of kind of what you the three of you have put together with material, and I don't know if I can give a better endorsement in this. So, folks listening, if you're a technology fan, this is my take on material, and I summarize it in sort of one word, which is one. That's the number of Android devices I own. Okay, seriously, it's an old LG tablet, old as in like 2.5 years old, and I rarely use it. However, I listen to material every single week. I am more or less an Apple guy. I admit it. I've had, all these other Apple guests, on the show. However, I want to know about Android. I love technology. I like to know what's kind of going on that side of the world. And I don't know. There is one Android show I subscribe to, and that's Material. It's because I like the dynamic that is developed between the three of you, and I like Relay. And I don't know if you're just a technology fan, even if you live in the Apple camp like me, add Material to that, because I think it will round out your kind of full-blown knowledge of things as good or better than any other show you could add to that mix. So that's my endorsement.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. It's surprising how many Apple people listen. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but
no, I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, no,
you know why? Because and this was one thing I wanted to mention to you, just real quick, because I want to get into App Camp and I want to get into a conversation on diversity. But fanboys, fangirls, right? You mentioned a few of the mean comments that come your ways, but too often people live in, and Andy's gone off on this rant many times. People just. It's almost like a religion for people. They live in one camp or the other.
Yep.
Have you felt that from the internet, especially more so now, given your role in Material? And if so, kind of how do you allow that to process your role as a co-host on an Android podcast?
Yeah. Okay. So yes to everything, because, it's, one of the reasons why I think Material is so successful, like you mentioned, is that, Russell does iOS development. This is something that he does for his day job. So it's not like he is completely immersed into Android all the time. Like he loves Android, and he, develops for Android as well. But a lot of time he does have to be on iOS because he is an iOS developer. Also, Andy being a tech columnist, iOS and Android all the time. Like, he can't just ignore
Macbreak Weekly.
And exactly. He has Macbreak Weekly. So, he has to be involved in that. And so we do understand the other side. And I think one of the frustrating parts for me when you hear crap about Google or Android is that a lot of people are just saying stuff and they actually don't know the truth about Google and Android. And I think that's what's most frustrating to me. I don't really care if you do or don't like Android. Like sure, whatever. I'm the Apple fangirl, or Apple, caught myself. I am the Android fangirl of the show. Like, there's no doubt about it. Like, I am the one that's like full hardcore, like Android. I'm the, like you said, the one you can relate to if you're the Android fan there. But for me, it's like, okay, if you don't like Android, whatever, you love Apple, whatever. Like, I love technology. I think everything is awesome. But when people, talk crap about Android or Google, and I'm like, that's not true. It's kind of frustrating because it's like, did you even do any research on this, or did you just hear someone say something and now you're just, going off on them? And so that's like annoying and frustrating. I said earlier that Casey Liss is my rival, and him and I go back and forth.
I love when you two do this. If
you follow us, if you want to have some fun, follow us on Twitter, me and Casey Liss, and you'll see us go back and forth. And it's just my favorite because, he's a huge Apple fan, and I'm a huge Android fan, and we kind of go back and forth on that. I tease him because, his podcast is called Accidental Tech Podcast. And I was like, oh, you're on that show called Apple Tech Podcast, right? And so, and so we kind of have this, rivalry and friendship just between the two. And like, we both obviously respect each other, and it's all in good fun. But I think, when we first started Material, Russell, Andy, and I were kind of like the I don't know, those, I'm trying to find a good analogy, but just like the black sheep of the network of Relay. You're in the Slack room and everyone's having this like hardcore deep conversation about something on the Apple world, and we're just like, oh, hi, so and it took some time, just like the podcast took some time for us to get comfortable, or maybe not, I don't know if comfortable, maybe we just feeling more at home. I think, within that, it's, we kind of joke around, like, we'll have a conversation about Google and everyone's kind of like quiet in there, but no, they've actually started speaking into that stuff. And so, at first I think it was definitely, you felt like the outsider for sure. It's kind of like, all right, you're this Android podcast and this Apple, very, very, very Apple heavy Relay, FM, which is the podcast network. So yeah, you did feel a little bit of the loner in there.
I'll tell you what, Yasmine, not only do I love watching you and Casey Liss go back, but I think you two are like long lost cousins, because your story and his are so similar, right? This concept of almost plucked from obscurity to be landing on this huge show. That's sort of what happened with him with ATP, right?
That's true.
He grew up with Marco, and he didn't really have prior podcast experience, and kind of dropped in first for Neutral and then for ATP. So both of your backstories are somewhat similar, at least on the podcaster kind of track there. So I think it's great when you two go back, because I think you guys understand each other maybe much more than others. So.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, I think someone when Material first launched, they were like, "You're the Casey Liss of Material," and okay. So confession time. I've never listened to an episode of ATP. What? Okay, so I confessed this to Casey already, so don't worry. I'm not gonna break his heart there. So when someone said that, I had to reach out to a friend and be like, "What does this mean?" And they're like, oh, "Okay," and they had to explain it to me, and I was like, "Oh, I get it. Okay, I get it." Because actually, the funny part about starting Material was, like you said before, I was kind of a nobody in that industry. Like, no one really knew who I was. There was close friends of mine who obviously knew I loved Android, because they were like, you need to start an Android podcast, right? But, besides that, no one in the Android community really knew who I was. And so it was, I kind of think I made a joke early on when we released Material Podcast, being like, thousands of Android listeners are Googling, who is Yasmine Evjen, because they didn't know. I think if you go back, if you really want to go back there, when we first launched Material, Russell and I were trolling. Well, Russell started trolling Twitter, and he's like, "Oh, I really wish there was an Android podcast, with this, within the community. Like, there's too many Apple tech podcasts and yada yada, stuff like that." And if you see the responses he got was just kind of like, "You should start one," and like you should stop, complaining and start one, and just like stuff like that. And then right before we actually launched the podcast, and I was like, maybe, and I think I sent him a picture of like a mic and an Android figurine. I was like, like maybe something like this, or I don't know, I forget what we said, but we started having this dialogue conversation, like implying that we were going to launch one. But of course, no one followed both of us usually, so they didn't see it.
Nobody would even know. All right, I want to touch base on this because I want you to expand more. You've touched on it just a little bit, and I apologize for putting at this point in the conversation because there's an argument to be made that maybe in your life or your work, maybe in general, it'll probably be the most important thing we've talked about. But I want to talk about your involvement with App Camp for Girls and generally how you see that fitting into a lot of your sort of hopes and desires and wishes for the serious need for more diversity in technology. So however you want to take that through the lens of App Camp or in general, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, so App Camp for Girls, as I mentioned before, for those that don't know who App Camp for Girls is, they're an organization started by Jean, and she wanted to get more girls and more women eventually into technology. And so she knew a lot of people in the Apple community, and she reached out and created this curriculum to teach 8th and 9th grade girls because they wanted to get their attention into tech before high school, and they wanted to introduce them into tech and coding and design for mobile apps. And so they started this program, and it originally started in the Pacific Northwest. And Aline, who is also on Relay F Network, she has a show called Less Than or Equal, and her whole basis of the show is getting the voices of the geek community out there, of the diverse geek community, and so highlighting a lot of women, people of color, people that identify in the LGBT community. So she wants to raise their voices and get them heard. And so we had met online. I don't know. We weren't friends on Twitter until someone was like, "How do you not know each other?" This was before This was before she was on Material. And actually, we met for coffee like right before Material was launched. And she's good friends with Jason Snell. And we were having a conversation about, we went out for coffee because she lives in Arizona like me. So we're both in Arizona. We're both into podcasting, and we're both into, tech, and we're both into getting diverse in tech. And everyone's just like, "How do you not know each other?" This is a weird. Exactly. Yeah. And of course now we do. And so we live pretty close too. And we met up, and she was telling me about App Camp for Girls and how she wanted to bring it to Phoenix because she interviewed Jean McDonald for her podcast Less Than or Equal, and like she was just talking about how that started and was kind of like, I kind of want to bring this to Phoenix because this sounds awesome, And so that's kind of how I got connected with App Camp for Girls, was through Aline. And so it's something, like I said before, a big passion of mine. Even just sharing my story of how I got into tech is that I didn't really have any other experiences or role models outside that I could really look up to say like, oh, these people are into tech, or these people code for a living or design for a living. So I didn't really know that these were even career options. And I think that's a lot of it. Like even when I talk to my niece who's in high school, and she, I'm trying to explain what I do, and she's like, "Oh, that sounds fun. Like, that's cool." She's not even aware of it. And so it's kind of sad because it's like, she's my niece, and, I'm in the tech industry, and this is something that I'm so passionate about. And even then she doesn't know all the aspects of it, And so I think there needs to be more awareness of it. I think, one thing just to touch on from being a Latina is that even though I am in the tech industry, someone that is a UX designer and did front end development before that, I told my daughter or my sister, like, hey, you should get, my niece into some like coding class or something. I think she'd really enjoy that, just to kind of explore. And she made a comment, and she didn't mean this to be rude, but it's just, I want to share it because I think it's something that still is very prevalent in minds. And she goes, that's kind of like what, white dudes who drink Mountain Dew do, right? Like that's kind of what people think that coding is. And it's just something that's just kind of like, I'm an example, and this is what I do development. But in my sister's mind, she still thinks of this stereotypical coding person of what they look like, an engineer looks like. And so, and that's kind of something that's kind of open at like, okay, no, we need to get more voices out there. They need to know that there are people in this industry who don't fit that stereotype, And so that's kind of where my passion for that stems. And beyond just wanting having a diverse team with a lot of different voices, is the fact that it actually makes your products better, is because there's a lot of things that you don't have to think of if you are if everyone on your team is the same. So for instance, just to give an example of something that people don't have to think of was when I started my first job, or when I started my recent job, my manager, he's great and really into getting into women into tech as well. Like him and his fiance are very passionate about that. And when I got my business cards, like all the people put their mobile cell phone numbers on their business cards. And I was like, oh, do we not have an office phone? And he goes, oh no, everyone just puts their mobile phone. And I was like, oh, all right, I'll have to find a Google Voice number, because I'm not going to pass this around with my actual cell phone number, and the potential for either, getting harassed, or even the fact that because I am a part of Material Podcasts, like eventually if I hand this out at Google I/O, if it's a listener or whatever, calling me outside of the business. So it's kind of, and I shared that to him, or I told them, and he's like, you know what? He's like, I feel so dumb. I didn't even think about that. And I was like, oh yeah, no, don't feel dumb. Like that's something, he goes, but that's just something that I never had to think about. Like this has never been an issue that our company has to deal with, because for us handing out our mobile phone number, like whatever, but not understanding that there could be, if as a woman hands out their number, it could be more of a harassment and whatnot. Right. So just stuff like that. And it's not to say that you're not considerate, or that you can't think of stuff like that, but you've never had to think of those things, and that's why they're not being brought to light. And that's not like to say anything against you as a person, but that's just saying that the truth is we're all different, and there's going to be things that you as a man have to think about that I don't have to think about as a woman. It's just kind of the way it is. And so just having that, I think, when you think about your products, it just makes them better, because they're like, oh, what about this scenario, or, this use case, or for this user? And they're like, oh, yeah, that actually is, really important. We really need to take care of that when we build into our product.
I want to ask you about this, Yasmine, because I think about this a little bit too. And one of the things I wonder about is this concept, sort of, where are our efforts best focused? Now, I know the answer to this is both, right? I know in advance the answer is both, but I'm kind of curious, for you personally, where do you feel like people like me, white guys, might want to help contribute to this effort? So I think that's kind of like a two-sided coin here. So the first one is, there are a lot of diverse people, women of color, minorities, that are doing amazing work in the fields today that we're talking about. In fact, as we hear all the time, these conversations, especially in big keynotes, whether they're I/O or WWDC, and we're always looking to kind of raise up those potential role models for the younger generation to see, hey, look, people like you do this, and they do great, and you should want to kind of look into more about what they do. So you got to kind of, look at that end of the spectrum. But then there's the other end of the spectrum, right, which is App Camp for Girls, which is making sure that young people who haven't necessarily decided their course of life know that there are great jobs to be had, that it's a super interesting field, that there's a lot of cool stuff going on. So there's like these kind of two sides. Sort of, where do you see the best work we can all do on either end of that spectrum?
Yeah, so both are good. So raising it's equally important, and I know people may disagree with me, but this is kind of where I stand. I think that there's equal importance in raising the voices of people that fit into those camps and getting their names out there, for them to actually speak out on diversity and the benefits of diversity, and not necessarily just like, hey, these are the benefits, this is what you should do, but actually speak out and say like, hey, there's an issue here, here's where the issues are, and here, here's the things that we can do and to help in this. And then the equally important is actually to showcase women or, people of color or any other minority group as technologists that are excelling in that industry, and actually just showcase them for their work. I think one of the things that's really frustrating for women technologists, and I know a lot of people kind of get frustrated with this, is that they want to be known as technologists first, because like, I'm amazing in what I do and I want to be known for that. But a lot of times people will kind of identify them as slowly being kind of like, oh, this person's going to be on our diversity panel or whatever, instead of like, hey, this person's going to be talking to us about Angular JS and all this stuff, and then potentially on our diversity panel. And so I think there's equal camps for both. I think you need to showcase that these, showcase them in their field and industry, and let them put them in a place where people know, hey, this is someone that is a leader in the industry, and, they're really smart. And then also, if they want to have the opportunity to speak on, diversity issues, that also would be a place for it, So, and I know some people don't like to speak on diversity issues because they don't want to be known as the quote unquote woman or person that's speaking on that issue, but for me personally, that doesn't bug me, just because one thing that I've noticed is that even though people think they hear what's happening in the world, or for being a woman of color in tech, they're like, oh yeah, it must be hard or whatever. They don't really know the stories, the personal stories. And even though they would consider themselves allies, and sometimes until they hear a story, then they realize, oh crap, like this is something that's happening to my friend. Like this isn't just something that happens like, to other people. This is something that happens to people that I know and here for it. And even then they would consider themselves allies, and they would know, oh, like, wow, I can't believe this is, it almost brings it more to life, like you can know something is true, but sometimes it doesn't really hit you until you hit home to you. So
have a personal experience with it. Right?
Exactly. So I think there's benefits in both. And so that's why I think both are equally important. And it's also whatever that person wants to, do. Like if you're asking a woman to come to your conference, it's like, okay, do they want to give a presentation on an actual technical thing, or do they want to give on diversity? So I think that having both of those as options.
It's obviously a huge problem. I'd like to think that maybe there's little tiny baby steps being taken, but I know one thing, that irony of all irony, there may not be anything, I shouldn't say that, a very significant thing that you're already doing in this desire of yours to raise this issue and shine a bigger light on it is just by playing the role you're playing on material. That in and of itself, like you mentioned, the woman you met in the hallway, and the effect that you've been able to have. I guarantee you there are other... Somewhere in those thousands of download numbers, there is a 13-year-old girl that's an Android fan, and she hears you in her earbuds every single week, and that could very well be solidifying a potential future path for her that, had you not ended up on this show, she may have eventually whisked away and gone into something else.
That's that's pretty amazing.
You may not have heard from her yet, but I bet you will at some point.
Oh man, that would be pretty awesome. So if you are that 13-year-old girl, please reach out, because that would be amazing.
Bring her on the show.
Bring her on the show there. Yeah, come on the show. Yeah. Well, thanks for saying that, Dan, because it's one of those things that you really don't know. And yeah, you're just kind of speaking into a mic every week and don't know the impact you leave. So yeah, it's just cool.
I bet you it exists. And just generally speaking, technology's such a great genre for podcasts, right? If you're a 13-year-old and you love technology, I guarantee you know about podcasts.
Right.
And if you've got an Android phone and you like that, I bet you found material. So my scenario is not that far flung. I'm almost positive it's happening.
Hey,
so.
And if you have Google Play Music or Spotify, Material Podcast is on both of them. So you don't even have to buy Pocket Casts. That's actually been one of the nice things I'm going to take a quick tangent, is that before on iOS, getting a podcast is very easy. Hey, go open that podcast app that I don't think you can download, you can't delete off your phone, because Apple won't let you. I don't know if they let you do that in the next version now. But it's usually like someone has some form of podcast app on there. So you could quickly say, search for Material, boom, there, subscribe, you're done. So before Google Play Music and even Spotify had some podcasts on that, what you had to do was, first you need to find a podcatcher. So Pocket Cast is my favorite. Oh yeah, I think that's $3 or $2 or something. And then someone that doesn't really know what this entire podcast thing is, like, oh, you have to pay for this, and then it's just kind of confusing. And so then first you have to get them to buy it, and then you have to tell them, okay, now search for my podcast, So there's kind of a few steps. But now that Google Play Music and Spotify, the example with my cousin who, her friend was like, oh, Yasmine Evjen. And she's like, what's a podcast? I don't know what that is, And I was like, do you have Spotify or Google? Or I asked her what phone she had, and she goes, I have an Android. And I was like, okay, great. Do you have Google Play Music or Spotify on your phone? And she's like, I have Spotify. And I was like, perfect. Just search for Material Podcasts. And she found it and subscribed. So that just made it so much easier than the whole, all right, you got to download and buy this thing.
I had the exact same experience last summer, I think, before Google Play Music or Spotify, and it was the exact same thing. It was an Android phone, and I was like, okay. And I did the exact same thing. I am a unabashed fan of Pocket Cast, and that's usually the first thing I say. And this particular friend of mine didn't even have like a credit card hooked up to their Google account.
No.
So they couldn't even buy it if they wanted to. And they're like, okay, I will, but I don't even think I even have it set up, or my card expired or something. Yeah. And so I said, okay, there's this app called Podcast Addict. It's not that great, but here, go subscribe to my show right now. But I got her, to check it out. So,
it definitely didn't make it easy for Android people.
That stuff is so 2015 now. It's so much better now.
It is.
Before I let you go, Yasmine, I know we're running short on time. I want to be respectful of your time. I do want just one quick question, because I've got to hear the story behind this, and I know there is one. So in your various bios and published interviews, I see this statement. Oh. She was once retweeted by the First Lady. I've got to know, how did that happen?
Yeah. Oh man. So I'm going to find the exact tweet now, because I want to get it verbatim. Just give me 2 seconds and I will find it, because
sure. I don't imagine many people can say this. How many people can say they were,
Michelle Obama, First Lady Michelle Obama, retweeted me on something, and I'm going to find that tweet now. There we go. Let's see. There's a link there. All right. Let's see if I can get a direct link to, Okay, so Michelle Obama started this campaign for 62 million girls, and the whole idea behind the social media campaign was she wanted people to share what they learned in school, and then she wanted to bring awareness that 62 million girls don't have the chance to explore these opportunities in education, because that's the truth in the world. A lot of girls are not allowed to go to school and be educated, and so that's one of the initiatives that Michelle Obama is really working on and wants to change in the world, and so I saw that hashtag and I was like, all right, that's me, right? How I am about allowing women to, seek education and participate into these industries. And so I tweeted out, in school, I learned how to use code and design to solve problems, hashtag 62 million girls don't have that chance. And I and she wanted you to upload a picture of yourself, kind of like a yearbook style. And behind me, it's when I was at Google I/O 2015, and there's 2 Android figurines behind me. And so she actually retweeted that one. So it was pretty awesome awesome because I know she retweeted a lot of those, but I don't think she retweeted all of them. So it was pretty awesome that the First Lady retweeted it. The funny thing is, like, I retweeted that, or I sent that out in the morning someday, and then like I had my phone in my pocket and I got it out. And then I saw that I was getting @replies from @Yasmine Evjen and @Flotus. And I was like, what? Like, did someone make a mistake? And it happened various times. And I was like, wait, what is happening? And then I realized Michelle Obama just retweeted my tweet. And so that's why people are replying to me.
So did you like completely freak out? Because I totally would have. I mean, like, I just would have been calling everybody I know. Like, I just would have been, I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was like, I turned to my husband. I'm like, look, Michelle Obama just retweeted me. And he was just, again, my husband is not into tech at all. So he's like, so she tweeted at you? Like, she was really confused. And oh man, if you could read the replies, I'll have to send you the link and you can maybe put us in the show notes or not. But
sure.
Some of these replies are so terrible. Like I had one, or I guess, I mean, everyone does not have amazing experiences in education. I guess one person said, like, in school, I learned to be a wife and not myself. This was in the 1960s. And I'm like, that sucks. Like, that's not what education is for. And then there's another person that tried to mansplain me and the First Lady of the United States.
Oh, that's good.
It was perfect. It was written in code. And then he proceeds to explain to us why it never works. So it was pretty amazing. So yes, that was, it was just fun.
If you ever want to just, I think there's two places you can go online to completely just have any positive outlook on humanity just be crushed, which is going to be YouTube comments or the @replies to any large, political figure or celebrity or something. Just, it's like, wow, people, this is just sad.
Yeah, it gets pretty terrible out there, but
it really does.
So that's the story behind it, and it was something that, again, I was just like, I want to tweet this out because it's, design and code are things that I'm very passionate about and I think are important. And there we go. Michelle Obama retweeted it. So yeah, I definitely took a picture of that and I think shared that, with my family. It was like, hey, check this out. Michelle Obama retweeted it. I was like, well, Michelle Obama maybe never did it, but her social media person did.
Either way, I think I think you can claim it in all of its glory. That's for sure. Well, before we go, Yasmine, we've been talking about all the wonderful work that you do, material and otherwise. Please tell folks where they can find the links to material. If somebody listening in the Arizona area wants to know more about App Camp, or maybe if they're in the Pacific Northwest or any other installations for App Camp for Girls, give out any of the links you've got.
All right, let me make sure I got the App Camp for Girls one right, because so
I can find it too.
Yeah, all right. Well, I got it. I'll if you are interested in App Camp for Girls, if you listen to this and say like, hey, I want to get my daughter, niece, or just one of my friends involved, definitely there is still some summer camps going on, and that you can still apply, and you can go to App Camp for Girls, and that's the number 4. On online.com, and you can find out more information there. And so they're all over the US, and hopefully I think there might be some over international ones later on, but nothing confirmed yet. So just, get on there and get a camp. And if you want to get involved for next year, definitely reach out, to everyone on there. I think there's definitely a way to send email. Be aware that if they are in camp season right now, so if they don't get back to you right away, it's not that they're ignoring you. There's a lot of planning. If you are interested in helping out or being a part of the Phoenix, reach out to me on Twitter at Yasmine Evjen, or even just follow me at Yasmine Evjen on Twitter if you're interested on Android and anything, technology related, throwing some shade over Casey Liss over there, or or you can find us on relay.fm/material for listening to the podcast, or Material Podcasts on any of your favorite podcasting clients, including Google Play Music and Spotify.
Excellent. Yasmine, thank you so much for taking the time to join me. This has been a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Dan. Take care.
And folks, all those links that Yasmine mentioned will be in the show notes and then some. Really hope you enjoyed this week's episode, folk. Until next week, my name is Dan Lizette for the Podcast Digest.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter at PodDigest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/the Podcast Digest. email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com, and you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.